Got it.
Brilliant. When you're ready, Steve.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. This is the All-Party Group for Childcare and Early Education. It's an online-only meeting today, which just ups the attendance even further for the highly supported All-Party Group. Today's please stick on mute if you're not speaking. Today's meeting is titled Financial Sustainability and Investment in Our Children's Futures. I'm Steve Brine. I'm the MP for Winchester, and I'm chair of the All-Party Group for Childcare and Education, and have been throughout this Parliament. So obviously in Westminster here, tomorrow is Budget Day. We look forward to hearing from my good friend, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, on what plans he has for the sector and for childcare, especially given there have been many rumours, as there always is pre-budget. So that makes our session today especially timely. Why have there been so many rumours? Well, bluntly, because this group and this sector have been very effective in constantly raising these issues. I saw the Chancellor last week. It was a meeting of 9 colleagues, and 3 of us raised the issue of childcare. And so the rumours are abound about what he will do in the budget. Nobody really knows. But the point that I would make, and I know that many have made this since these rumours, is that we've had years of underfunding in this sector, and so we're at a point where thousands of providers are closing their doors, and I've had a couple in my constituency in the last year. So people in early education and in childcare, we can increase the free hours, we can do tweaks, but we as an All-Party Group have been consistently calling for a fundamental reform of the childcare sector in our country, which is the most expensive in Europe. It is also complicated, so it's been tweaked over the years many times, leaving very complicated layers. And the final thing I would say is that we can talk about funding all we like, but we have a supply side issue in this sector at the moment, which is that as I said, settings are closing, and when settings are closed, then there's nothing to access. So that is the context in which we meet, and the context in which the budget will happen tomorrow. So we've got, as usual, a nice array of guests. We actually don't have Maria Caulfield, the Minister for Women, who's got a personal situation which has caused her to pull out. But we also have some good friends joining us. So Councillor Asher Craig, who's Deputy Mayor of Bristol, responsible for children's services, education and equalities. Councillor Craig is with us. We'll also be hearing from researchers including Gabriella Conti, Professor of Economics at UCL in London, and Alison Baulos, who is the Executive Director at the Centre for Economics of Human Development at the University of Chicago, where I used to live, as we were just catching up before we came on air. And both of those will be able to provide us with some analytical research and data on the financial investment picture as it is at the moment. You can tweet your thoughts on the All-Party Group's Twitter account, which is at APPG Early Years. And please put hashtag CEE APPG. So CEE APPG, and follow us at APPG Early Years, and that would be much appreciated. So without further ado, let's get on and hear from some of our friends and our guests who are on the line today. Thanks so much for your time. Let's start with you, Gabriella, Professor of Economics at UCL. Thank you so much for giving us your time. You have the floor, and I think you also have some slides. So over to you.
Yes, thanks very much for having me. Let me share my slides. Do you all see them? Can you confirm? Yes? Okay, great.
Yes,
so,
we can.
Delighted and honored to be here. Let me share with you some of my thoughts on early years in childcare in the UK ahead of tomorrow's budget, which hopefully help put things in perspective. Let's start with the challenges. Well, we all know what are the key challenges. So just to name a few of them. So the current childcare system, we all know it is expensive. And here we see a graph with OECD countries, and we see the UK is here on the right, and we notice it's particularly expensive for couples more than for singles. It is also complex. So if you go to that nice website, which is Childcare Choices, and thinking about couple, you give 4 different options in terms of couples living in England with 1-year-old, above and below certain income threshold, or not working. You see that there is a variety of different options, some of them even in contradiction or which cannot all go together with each other. Then it's also insufficient for some respects, in the sense that because of some of the issues that Steve was mentioning, not all providers are able to offer all the free offer. So for example, for 3 and 4-year-olds, for the 30 hours free entitlement, some of them cannot offer for various reasons: lack of space, lack of staff, necessity of additional paperwork, or even lack of demand. It is, for some respects, also ineffective. So some colleagues of mine have shown that particularly the free half-day childcare, the 15 hours entitlement, has very small improvements in children attainment and no effects on maternal employment. And last but not least, I will say it's somewhat incoherent with the research, because it does spend less of the money in the years in which we will need it the most, which is the 0-2 rather than the 3-5. So let me make some consideration. Let's start with the demand side. So of course, there has been a lot of focus in the current discourse on cost, and rightly so. Families need to have support to afford the childcare. And so it's really welcome what we have heard about the budget, that there is going to be an improvement in the timing and amount, which can be claimed on the universal credit. And as this graph from my colleagues at IFS show, indeed, the support for low-income family is going small and smaller over time. So that's good. But you don't need an economist to tell you that what enters parental decision-making in terms of childcare choices is only about money, income, and prices. Other factors matter too, such as preferences, norms, and beliefs. Some parents do not send their children to childcare because that's not their preference to do so. And one aspect that we know very little about is parental beliefs. What parents think about what childcare does to their children. Is it useful for their development? And there is very little research on that, which is why in June 2020, we asked parents of under 5 so whether they thought among different types of investment in their children, which one was more effective for improving their development. And we asked them to compare childcare attendance with parental play and child play. And here you can see what parents think essentially is that them playing with their children is more productive to improve child development than childcare attendance, although they are both productive. Parental beliefs, interestingly, are not correlated with the Ofsted ratings of childcare, but are predictive of their choices. So if a parent thinks the childcare is going to be more productive, then it's more likely to send the child to childcare. That makes a lot of sense. Importantly, there is a gradient. So more educated parents perceive higher returns to them playing with their children. So they'll probably play more, increasing gradients in child development. So these are all the considerations which enter the choice of whether to send or not the children to childcare, in addition to monetary factors and which type of childcare arrangements to have. Let's move to some consideration on the supply side. So we've heard from Steve that, of course, many centers have unfortunately had to close. And when it comes to childcare, we can't avoid talking about quantity and quality. Now, the evidence that we have for the United Kingdom from very nice papers of Joblan and other colleagues of mine points to the fact that it's not only structural quality, which matters on its own, but it's combined with what we call process quality, as summarized by the Ofsted rating. So things both about staff qualifications, but also children-staff ratio, but also what happens in the childcare center. And interestingly enough, quantity and quality interact positively, so both need to be taken into account. Still, as we just saw before, parents do not take Ofsted rating into account when making their provider choices. So that's something else which can be provided information to the parents. I'm, on the other hand, a huge believer in the workforce empowerment. I think the early years workforce is super important. I'm doing myself a lot of work on health visiting and family nurse partnership, and then the childcare workforce in Ecuador with the Ministry of Education there. And the workforce need adequate pay, continuous professional development, support, but also incentives for recruitment and retention. And now there is quite good, very recent international evidence of my work in this respect. Last but not least, this is the social scientist plea. We need to collect data to track progress and see what works and what doesn't. Let's move on to the opportunities. So as Steve was mentioning before, there is indeed the need for bold, radical reforms. And which are the reforms which are discussed? And on the demand side, it's really a question of whether to give it free to all or give people free to choose. And I'm like many other stakeholders that I've read, I'm the opinion it's important to give a parent choice, but the effectiveness of childcare only, depends on what would have happened to the child and to the mom in the absence of childcare. So what is the counterfactual? Which is why, while we can give choice and flexibility to everyone, we do need to give more support to low-income families, like it's been done with other programs that I mentioned in the next slide in the past. At the same time, it's important to give more information to the parents, because from the Childcare Early Experiences Service, it's emerged that parents do not have all the information they might need. And then funding on the supply side, we can expand more in the Q&A. Here, I'm just going to point to two interesting programs which have been used in the United States. One, Pay for Success scheme in the Obama administration. Another one, the Biden administration is exploring childcare as really thinking as business support infrastructure, so asking employers to contribute. And last, opportunities like beyond childcare. Childcare does not exist in a vacuum, right? It's part of a series of services which are all aimed at improving child development and families' well-being. Starting from the end of parental leave, so giving more support to shared leave would be important, but also within an integrated and joined-up set of services, like currently it's happening with Family Hubs, thanks to Andrea Asdom and their team, but like in the past happened with Sure Start. And some of you might know that my colleagues at the Institute for Fiscal Studies, we've been evaluating for years Sure Start, and we have shown that significantly improved the child health up to the end of adolescent at an amount of funding which wasn't particularly higher than the ones of the other schemes. So far, we have shown that health savings recoup a third of the cost of the program, and also in areas with Sure Start, there was higher take-up of the free entitlement. Now, I'm not saying we should go back to Sure Start, but we should just learn the lesson and take what was good from it. And last but not least, beyond childcare, because the well-being of families and development of child does not end there. It continues with the family. So we need to find a way of giving some support at home. And one option which is being actively investigated in the research these days is the use of digital parenting offers. But again, the jury is still out there. So to sum up, we're all aware of the challenges the sector has been facing, which has last consequences, as Steve was mentioning, for families, but for the economy future as well. And it's time for radical reforms. So I'm looking very hopeful at what tomorrow will bring, and if not tomorrow, the next few months. So thanks very much for listening. I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Gabriella. That's very good. A couple of people have already asked questions, one of which is, can we access the slides that you used? There's no reason why your slides couldn't be shared with participants, I presume?
No, I'm very happy to PDF and send them.
Okay.
And we'll also have a recording of the call on YouTube later
as
well.
True.
Yeah, obviously there is a recording of the call. But if you wanted the slides, then I think the best thing to do is, Oliver, if you could just put the email address of the All-Party Group into the chat. If you particularly want the slides, then just send a short email to that address, and then they can be shared with you that way.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Gabriella. Okay, Alison, from my old city, where I understand that the river is being turned green already in preparation for St. Patrick's Day weekend, which is a tradition where we turn the river right the way through the middle of Chicago green, which is, I think, a lovely tradition. Maybe we should try that with the Thames, but maybe not, given that England are playing Ireland in the rugby this weekend here. Anyway, I digress. Alison, you have the floor. Over to you.
Excellent. Thanks for allowing me to be here. I am Alison Baulos. I work at the University of Chicago, and I co-lead a center with Nobel Prize winning economist, Professor James Heckman. And our center looks to understand the conditions and policies under which individuals achieve their fullest potential. So it's no surprise that I'm here on this call. We work with partners across the globe on projects such as thinking about the mechanisms of successful programs, developing new measures for things like socio-emotional skills. And I'll just highlight for you some of our innovative research. This probably looks familiar to some of you. It tells the story of the work that you do. It's known as the Heckman equation, and it illustrates what we call the technology of skill formation. So you can think about a dollar when it's invested in the return at various ages. And as you know, early childhood education and experiences are the foundation on which human capital is built. So of course, investments later in life are going to matter, but in the earliest years, those investments are most economically efficient and equitable, and they will make later investments yield higher returns. And many investments that aim to promote social mobility target one area, such as food insecurity, literacy, mental health, but you have the potential to create more social stability than any other program and committee, because early childhood programs can unify all of those interventions and sharpen the tools that promote educational attainment and economic opportunity. So about 15 years ago, we started to look at a number of successful early childhood interventions with long-term follow-up. And we worked with our partners to study what these children looked like, well, many years, including into adulthood after the intervention. And the news is positive. These high quality programs showed a high rate of return for these under-resourced participants. And the evidence was really clear that, again, these investments in early childhood are equitable and economically efficient. The benefits far outweigh the costs. So indeed, they're an investment, not just an expensive program. Both in the short term and in the long term, there are benefits. And these outcomes extend to a child's parents while they're in the program, their siblings around the same time, and their own children when they become parents themselves. So like I said, I'll show you a few key findings. And first, let me note that there's a number of ways to implement these programs. What I'm going to show comes from three types: a home visiting, childcare, so a full day, full year, and part-time preschool program that aligns with the school year. Each of these could be successful. It's up to communities and parents to choose what's best for them. And the key elements across all of these programs are that they engaged families, engaged parents and families, adapted to the cultural values, and supported the staff. I really agree with Gabriella that, that we should support the early care workforce because what the evidence shows is the key mechanism that promotes child development is positive interactions between children and adults. So the first study, our colleagues here, Sally is at University College London and her team at the University of West Indies. This is a home visiting program called Reach Up. It's now all around the world, and it was implemented in Jamaica with mothers when children were 9 to 24 months old. And then when the research looks at them, like I said, later in life at age 31, you see a lot of different things. Those who received the home visiting program had significantly greater IQ, cognitive flexibility, reduced depression, lower instances of substance use, reduced risky behaviors. They were 26 percentage points more likely to graduate from college and had 43% higher wages. And another home visiting program is called Preparing for Life. It's outside of Dublin and rigorously studied by Professor Orla Doyle at UCD. Research on PFL shows that children who received the program, the high treatment group, entered school with stronger verbal skills. So they're more equipped to engage in the learning environment. And so it's no surprise that at age 9, we're seeing higher scores. These children were better at thinking logically, making decisions, engaging in learning. Their team now is preparing for the follow-up at age 13, and we're bringing this program to Chicago, so stay tuned for more. Abecedarian was a childcare program, full year, center-based, and it prioritized language-rich environments and the interactions with adults. And the work of Gabriella here, we were surprised to find at age 30 lower prevalence of risk factors for cardiovascular and metabolic disease, stroke, and diabetes. And health is one of the many channels through which these programs impact individuals, their families, and also bring a cost savings for governments. And additional research looked at this program and found a 13.7% return. The enhanced income of the mothers basically paid for the program itself. And then, like I said, these effects are going to carry through. So you can think of these programs as impacting 2 generations. So parents are able to work when that is their choice. And so those increased wages are occurring and bringing resources to the household, while the children is also building their skills that are going to lead to lifelong success. Preschool program was another. It included weekly home visiting, and in this work we find even stronger generational effects. The participants, when they became adults, had more stable lives, more likely to own a home, less involved in crime, higher wages, more education, and with these additional skills and resources, the benefits are able to pass to the next generation. Again, they were growing up in more stable and resourced households, and that can break a cycle of inequality. So the children were more educated, healthy, and employed. So these four studies show that these investments can have a significant rate of return. And just to recap, there's a number of dimensions that you can look at: socio-emotional learning, health, and even thinking about the next generation. And these translate into real dollars and outcomes for individuals, their families, and society. We're often asked, what is quality? And what we know is that the workforce is really what's driving this. In the case of the home visiting programs, they're hired from the community. They have experience with the families they serve. They're a coach or a guide rather than just a teacher or clinician telling parents what to do. For the preschool and childcare program, wages were in line with teachers in primary schools, and the educators in the classroom had flexibility, support, and autonomy for child-led and play-based developmentally appropriate activities. And in my 2 decades of doing this work, I see the strengths-based is really important and needs to be carried through at all levels. Funders and policymakers need to trust that parents know their children, the workforce knows their community, organizations can support and engage their workforce, and it's a parallel process which allows every aspect to reach its fullest potential. So just as we expect programs to do with parents being strengths-based, policies and funding needs to do the same. So there's a lot of open research questions. I like Gabriella's call for more data, but the evidence overall is really clear that early education is important, and so is the work that all of you do. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Good. Thank you very much. If you're happy for anyone to see your slides, then please send them to the email address in the chat from the Secretariat. So that's great. Thanks. Okay, and then thirdly, but no means least, is Councillor Ashler Craig. Hello, Deputy Mayor of Bristol. I think you're actually in London though, aren't you today? Explains why your broadband is playing up. So you're Deputy Mayor and Children's Services, Education and Equalities brief. So that's really kind of you to join us. Would you like to say a few words for 5 minutes or so?
I would. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I have to say, we jumped, as a city, we jumped at the opportunity to also respond and give some written evidence to the Education Committee's inquiry around support for childcare in the early years. So I'm going to touch on some of the key points that we made in that submission. But just to kind of give you an overview of what we're dealing with in our city. So Bristol is a centre of economic growth and productivity. We have a higher than national average employment rate of 81.8% compared to 78.5%. And we also have a higher than national average gross weekly pay of £623.60 compared to £613. So this economic growth and productivity, however, is not equally accessed and shared across the city, with 41 areas in the top 10% most deprived in England, including 3 in the top 1%. Nearly 20% of children in our city are in low-income families, and 28% of children are considered disadvantaged. The result of this inequality is a lack of equitable access to childcare and early years provision for families experiencing multiple deprivation. And this inequity, as we've have heard, has long-term consequences, with 3 of 5 of the worst performing areas in the country for higher education participation being in the south of our city, where there are significant concentrations of deprivation. The Council is committed to providing accessible and affordable childcare and early years education via our maintained nursery schools and by supporting the sustainability of our diverse range of providers. We have also worked with partners from across the city to develop our belonging strategy, which outlines our approach to ensuring children have access to education that is inclusive and values diversity. My apologies. My screen has just gone dead and I need to. Okay. So in terms of the key points that I wanted to touch on, of course, funding for free early years entitlement is wholly inadequate, and it's led to providers scaling back their provision. We've seen staff leaving the sector and providers having to increase their fees for paying parents to make up the difference. Our maintained provision is a vital asset to the city, particularly, as I said, to underrepresented groups from the most deprived wards and children who are not white British. And historical underinvestment from central government has disproportionately impacted these communities. In the Chancellor's budget tomorrow, it's expected that childcare support for those on universal credit will be extended and paid up front. It's also rumoured that new childcare workers will be given a £500 joining bonus. These changes are welcome, but fall wholly short of the full funding required to transform provision. And local authorities need to be supported with the funding that covers the full cost of providing high quality childcare. In Bristol, we launched something called our Belonging Strategy, which outlines our city's commitment to investing in every area of a child's early life and education. And as a city, we are committed to tackling the issues that undermine some children's potential outcomes. Bristol is pioneering a systems-led approach to support our private, voluntary and independent early years sector, and our provision of high quality guidance and support through our network of lead teachers has supported 96.5% of PVI providers to obtain an Ofsted rating of good or outstanding. So investing in the early years should span beyond nursery and education provision. Government must invest in public health and leisure services to improve the universal offer to families. Our service is developing integrated and joined up working pathways across health, family hubs and the economy and skills services to improve workforce recruitment and offer clear career pathways across potential applicants at every level from entry to graduate level. We've heard from colleagues who've given their context around kind of nationally and internationally, but you know, for the local challenges, funding rates. I mean, Bristol received a 9p per hour per child uplift to the 2-year-old free early years entitlement and 6p for the 3 and 4-year-old rate. The 3 and 4-year-old rate had not previously been lifted since 2017. The current funding gap remains. In Bristol, a 3 and 4-year-old rate is paid at £5.80, and of this, £4.94 is paid directly to providers, with 29% being used for central services and 57% being used for SEN provision, deprivation, and system leadership. And in 2022, our providers reported an average cost of service delivery of £6.02, meaning the average gap in funding is at least £1.08 per hour per child. In terms of sufficiency, Bristol has maintained an appropriate supply of provision across the city, but this is becoming more challenging. And a recent survey has highlighted that 50% of our providers have had to reduce their places. The same survey also highlighted that 75% of our respondents are carrying at least one staff vacancy. Just to finish up, in terms of Bristol's investment in early years provision, a minimum of 95% of local authority free early years entitlement funding must be distributed to early years providers, with local authorities able to use the 5% more flexibly. And in Bristol, that funding is used to cover SEND inclusion as a statutory requirement, deprivation top-up, so providers who offer places to children from our most deprived wards receive a top-up to their normal rate. System leadership, a cohort of lead teachers who offer advice, support and guidance across the sector. 92% of our providers favour this approach, particularly as it reduces the requirement to employ qualified lead teachers in their setting. Bristol also coordinates a unique enhanced provision. We have registered childminders who receive an additional rate and support to provide the city's most vulnerable children. And in one of the most deprived parts of the city, St. Paul's Nursery School and our Children's Centre was recently selected as a lead stronger practice hub. But in terms of policy recommendations, I can't stress enough, and I did like Gabriella's proposal, free for all or free to choose, if only that could be. But we are calling on government to work much more closely with local authorities to determine a much more evidence-based approach to assessing the real cost of providing childcare. And this should form the basis of a funding settlement which enables both maintained and PVI provision to provide high quality and develop a motivated workforce. We're again calling on government to invest in the workforce, the early years workforce, in order to improve recruitment and retention. Developing national pay scales similar to those for teaching would support better recruitment. And finally, as the APPG has previously recommended, that early years providers are given full business rates relief to help with growing costs. We would support this policy, providing local authorities were fully compensated as they are as part of Welsh Government's rates relief. And I think I'll just leave it there for now, but thank you for the opportunity to come and address the APPG this afternoon. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, so we got a little bit of time to throw it open to comments and to questions to our wonderful guests. Number of points put in the chat. Please say your name and where you're from. So, you know, you're a provider or an educator or a parent or whatever, which I just think that would be helpful for the record. Emma Comer, you made a point about free childcare. Did you want to make that?
Apologies in advance because it's not directly sort of linked to the speakers, but I've long had an issue with the term free childcare, not because of where we are at the moment in terms of it just not covering anywhere near what it needs to, but the fundamental issue with free childcare is that in the private sector, you have a whole hodgepodge of village halls that are rented out. I own Talltrees Kindergarten. Apologies, I forgot to say that. So I run a very setting, but we're in a huge grade 2 listed building with a massive garden, all sorts of things that add extra costs on. So even if government does put up the funding rate, how on earth do they equate to, you know, which city would get a higher funding rate, what your building is, what your demographic is? We've got a big car park, another nursery might not have that. But we offer nutrition, organic chef cooked food as part of our offering. Some nurseries wouldn't. You know, it is impossible to find one rate that is going to give exactly what is needed to provide the best quality at a particular private setting in a particular area. I will actually say it is impossible. I've always thought right from the beginning that parents should be told that this is a subsidy, and there may well be a number of nurseries that can provide it free, particularly in areas of deprivation. That is incredibly important, but I do not think it's a one size fits all, and the actual free childcare will never ever work and cause the kind of problems that we're in now. That is partly one of the issues I feel.
No, it's a point well made. Let's bring in some other comments. Helen Garini, you were talking about ratios, but you're also talking about business rates, which is a subject I raised in the House. We had an estimates day debate, which is when we agree the money for departments, debate last week around childcare. In the House, I raised this point about business rates. Helen, did you want to introduce yourself and just make your 2 points, ratios and business rates?
Yes, hello. My name's Helen Garini, and I have a day nursery in Cirencester and also a term time nursery in London in the Church Hall. Yeah, the issue of rates is something that's really hitting providers at the moment, because they have changed the way that they are being calculated, and they're now issuing a price which seems to be quite randomly picked per child. So my business rates for my building has gone up by £11,000 from April, which is obviously massive. So I can't understand how on the one hand we're in the paper all over the place with the government talking about how to reduce fees, and that on the other hand they're increasing people's rates like this at a ridiculous and very alarming rate. And I know that this is a massive topic on various Facebook owners sites that I'm on, so that's one thing. And where is it that they expect this extra money to come from if it isn't from the parents? There's nowhere else that it can come from, and that's on top of course the energy prices, interest rates, living wage, and all that. And then also the ratios issue. We've been talking and calling for so long. The ratios, changing the ratios in terms of the number of children that we can look after is not going to help reduce the cost, because any decent setting is not going to do that, because our staff are already under a lot of pressure. We've got a workforce crisis going on, and the last thing that we want to do as providers is put more pressure on the staff to have to look after more children, and it's going to create a not very safe, not very pleasant environment for these children. So that is just very frustrating, because it feels like the government have got no real clue as to what's actually going on the ground. The issue that we have, which lots of people have talked about, is we don't have the staff, and what they need to address for us is allowing, for example, apprentices that are training to be level 3 to perhaps be counted in ratios, so that we can address that huge crisis that everybody's facing in terms of trying to find qualified staff. And they're talking about giving a bonus to new staff starting, but they're just where I don't know where they think these staff are magically going to come from, because it's not really about money. Wages have been going up and up as everybody fights for the same tiny pool of staff that just don't exist and is still dwindling. So it's just very frustrating that government really don't seem to understand what is actually going on for us. That's
okay. So there's thanks, Helen. So there's a couple of people there made points. We've got some more coming in. Which one of our guests would like to just pick up some of the themes that have been raised there?
I'll just throw in a quick point about the wages and the shortage. So we have the same issue here in the US, and some of the research, of course, in the K through 12 sector, when wages are already higher. So given livable and reasonable market-based wages, teachers will actually take more supports rather than they're going to hire or pick a job based on the quality of the environment. So that is where increasing ratios, like Helen said, is more difficult. So thinking about coaching or other management supports in the classroom and what that looks like. And there's ethnographic research as well that looks at what these policies can look like on the ground in the classroom, and how children, when they're in concentrated poverty classrooms, for example, are taking more time from the teachers. So there's less of that one-on-one time with adults. So those are some of the considerations to keep in mind.
Yeah. Okay. Claire, you've got your hand up. Claire Roberts, do you want to introduce yourself? Asha's just going to say something first. Go on, Asha.
Yes, I wanted to kind of just come back on the point that was made about, you know, how much is free, and the inequity, basically, childcare right across the country. And I think one of the issues that we're constantly grappling with, and I'm sure we all are, is the tax-free childcare scheme and the support childcare for benefits. And our experience with supporting parents is that the tax-free childcare scheme is really difficult for them to navigate. It contains too strict an eligibility criteria. We're also concerned that the total amount of a family can claim via universal credit for childcare costs has been frozen since 2005. That's what, 17, maybe 18 years ago, while prices, as we all know, have risen substantially since then. So it's a particular concern as a significant proportion of households on universal credit are in work. Bristol would, of course, support any further consultation on wider reforms to simplify this. But this is the problem. There is no easy solution. I think one of the things I'm really good at doing is looking at the examples, and I'm really going to look back at some of the things that Gabriella and her colleague have made some to look at what we're doing in other parts of the Europe and the US, and to see whether or not they can be applied. It's just unbreakable. It's just, we're at breaking point in the sector, and we're seeing more and more nurseries, I think, closing as well, as the crisis gets worse and worse. So yeah, we're at breaking point.
Thanks, Asha. I'm going to bring in Melissa Philby at one point because she talked about different types of childcare. It's very confusing for parents, something I mentioned at the start. But Claire, over to you, Claire Roberts.
Hi, I'm Claire Roberts. I'm Chief Exec of Kids Planet Nursery Group. I oversee 156 nurseries, so I have a pretty broad experience of what's going on across the country. There are fundamental issues here with everything that you talk about. We want to support parents, of course we do, but the biggest problem that's going to fall flat on its face here is the government are going to do things to support parents, and us as providers will have our hands tied and not be able to support them because of the fact that we can't find the qualified colleagues. Helen made a very good point. We're playing a game at the moment of trying to find qualified people into our sector, which quite frankly aren't there anymore. Brexit has wrecked this sector more than we ever imagined it would do. And retail and hospitality have taken colleagues by paying wages that are unsustainable in the early years sector. So if someone doesn't get right the ratio of qualified to unqualified colleagues, who actually, in my experience, many unqualified people are far more capable at looking after children in a caring way than a level 3 qualification actually means, we are going to really come unstuck. And what are great initiatives potentially by the government will fall flat on its face. The other point, just touching on business rates are now being calculated from the 1st of April based on the number of registered children that you have. So and it's done off your last Ofsted report. So no one can do anything to change what we're being valued on, which is just going to be another nail in the coffin in a sector which is already struggling. And someone's got to do something, because I think for many years now, and I've been in this a very long time, no one's listened or done anything.
Lots of people have listened, Claire. It's not the same.
Or done very little, Steve, unfortunately.
We exist to listen and to channel what's said in the sector into ministers, and to both inform me and the other members of the group when we speak in the House. Unfortunately, we can't make we can't make ministers do what we want. We can only provide the evidence, as we did very successfully on ratios. You know, we provided the evidence, I think, pretty effectively on that, which turned the discussion, and there's lots of discussion in the chat about ratios coming back as an issue, as there is about this bonus, the point of bonuses. Melissa Philby, I'm presuming you're still on the call.
I am.
Could you just introduce yourself and expand on your point?
Okay,
you're very dark there, but don't worry.
No, I don't like it because I'm by a window. Can you see that better?
Oh, there you go. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I work for Devon. I'm in the early years and childcare service, and I've also do the holiday activities and food programme. And in my work, I do a lot of talking with parents about the options to pay for childcare. And it's really complex for people. I understand it and I can talk to people about it, but they don't understand what they can get and how to pay for it, and that they can use different funding streams. And I've been to job centres and given talk to the work coaches. They don't understand all the different ways of paying for childcare. So I just think for parents it's complex to be able to access the different funding streams. I give talks to providers, you know, to try and encourage that. But yeah, I just feel when you're in it, you understand it, but as a new parent, it's very complicated. So I don't know if there's anything could be done. Too many different things to apply for at different ages.
100%, and that's why I said, you heard me say in the introduction, you know, that over the years it's been tweaked and layered, and that's why I think it's not only the most expensive childcare, it is the most confusing childcare. Yeah. Gabriella, Alison, actually, would you like, any of you like to comment on some of the recent points that we've had?
Yeah, I can say a couple of things. I wanted to say something about like a few points that I noted down. So one size fits all does not work. That
I'm writing a collar's name.
Sorry, I hear some background voices.
Yeah, could you just pop yourself on mute? Anybody who's just recently unmuted. Thanks so much.
Yeah, so I want to say like that one size fits all will not work. That I totally agree with that. And also want to mention that in my slides didn't mention about the business rates, because to be sure, I'm not like too involved in that aspect. So I didn't want to say something where hadn't studied enough, didn't have a particular strong opinion one way or the other. So it would be useful to understand more. My understanding is that childcare is treated differently from other forms of industries. In which case, why is that? I mean, what are the reasons? But I want to say something in particular about looking at examples from other countries. So because I've given examples, Alison has given examples, and I've seen in the chat the example of Ireland, which I know a little bit because I'm part of the Foundation for Information and Research, and Eva Lloyd is also part of it. So I heard from her essentially the reform which happened in Ireland, everything they did. And as far as understanding, Ireland moved from a market-based system to a system where there is much more. They doubled the public funding, and then there was a lot of support for the government, both in terms of providing infrastructure, but also regulating and providing inspections, which is, I would say, not exactly the way in which England will go, because it seems like they were in a completely different starting position. But this also say that I believe we should look around and see what other countries have done and what has worked for them. That doesn't mean that we can just import and do exactly the same thing for the UK, because for a lot of the interventions that I've studied, which in particular refer to the 0-2 and the health visiting, I mean, I can tell you quite a few programs which have worked well elsewhere haven't worked just as well in the UK, both because, or at least in England, both because the usual care is different and the counterfactual is different, and there are other programs in place. So it is important to think as a nation, what do we want for our children? What do we want for the families? What do we want from the childcare, or as someone correctly said, the childhood education and care system? I agree. What do we want it to deliver, and then what's the best way to delivering it without, of course, with funding, as it must happen regardless of what choice, because without appropriate funding, none of this could happen. So yeah, that's what I want to
Thank you.
One thing, sorry, one more thing that it's reflected both in what I say and what Alison has said is that I do believe that it's important to give everyone choice, to have some sort of universality, but both the programs that Alison spoke about and My Evidence on Sure Started Our program tells us they are more effective of families of lower income or in like Sure Start poorer neighborhoods. So I do believe that there needs to be increased, attention or more supplements to families who are in the greatest needs. So, if we had to think about how to distribute resources, I would be very aware of keeping that in mind, given all the evidence that we have.
Okay, thank you. Philippa, I'm going to bring in you, Philippa Thompson, and then I'm just going to ask our panelists if they want to wrap up, and then I will wrap up, and then we've got to finish because I have to be in select committee very shortly. But thanks. Over to you.
Thanks, Steve. I just kind of, for me, it's about going back to fundamental principles of what we mean. We're using the word childcare, and Gabriella's hinted at that. That was my comment in the chat. You know, we're talking about early childhood education and care here, not childcare, because that has perceptions that enable us to be underfunded in many ways and doesn't value the workforce. Sorry, I didn't say who I was. I'm principal lecturer at Sheffield Hallam University, but I'm also chair of the Early Childhood Studies Degrees Network. And so I was interested in Alison's, and I kind of posted, oh, this is reminiscent of the preschool project, and then you spoke about it. But we've been seeing this research since the 1960s about the benefits of investing in early childhood has the knock-on effect. And I don't know why the message isn't getting through in terms of government, in terms of costing, and we talk about throwing bonuses here and throwing them there and throwing a bit of money here, and we just need the investment. And I suppose what concerns me the most is the strategy and the fact that there doesn't seem to be a clear strategy. I'm even listening to new potential government coming through, and it still is not valuing the quality of the workforce and that strategy. We talk about pay scales, but that straight through, we've got graduates coming out who are really highly qualified and knowledgeable. They might need a bit more practice experience, but they're really knowledgeable, and they're being headhunted by organisations into graduate roles because their transferable skills are amazing. They can work with people, as can everyone who works in settings in early childhood. They've got incredible transferable skills, and yet they're paid minimum wage. And until that strategy and investment is there, where are we? We're looking at economics and transactions of children and families, and actually it's so much more complex. And I just want to see that proper strategy there to invest in our children and families. That was a bit of a soapbox, wasn't it? But sorry.
I love the soapbox. You're absolutely right there. I mean, one of the primary causes of
they are the rules. They are the rules.
Yeah. But I think one of the primary causes of the current workforce crisis is indeed poor pay. We understand what the average hourly wage across the workforce is, like £7.42. And we know that this has been caused by historic underfunding of early years provision, and it won't improve unless the sector begins to receive above inflation increases in funding. While the rise in the national living wage is welcome for employees, without the necessary increase in funding, providers will likely be forced to consider continuing to scale back their provision. In our own college, our APPG college in Bristol has reported a significant reduction in applications to the new early years T-level because of its over-reliance on assessment by examination. And providers have also reported that the requirement to have maths and English GCSE for a level 3 qualification also has limited the intake. So the early years workforce must be well equipped, but this must involve a greater focus on functional skills, a clear pathway for progression once they are employed. And just finally, workforce issues have been developing long before the pandemic, but the various lockdowns just reinforced the financial difficulties through minimal support for the additional operational costs of staying open, as was required through those periods. And then there's lack of access, as I said, to business reliefs that other sectors were provided with. So our providers in Bristol have made it clear that Brexit has been a significant barrier to recruiting suitably qualified staff, and early years workers, they said, should be added to the Home Office immigration shortage list to enable providers to recruit from outside the UK if they need to more readily, like we are doing for social workers, for example.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Thank you so much. Look, we've got to wrap it up there. I'm really sorry we have. Can I just say thanks ever so much to Alison and to Asha and to Gabriella for giving up their time to join us. You know, we at one point we had 100 people on this call. I can tell you now, having been in Parliament a long time, I have not seen that you don't see that many people on all party group calls that often. So it tells us a lot. I think we probably should have held this meeting tomorrow, given it's budget tomorrow. But you know, we're in a bit of a holding pattern, given that the budget is imminent. But I think we know tomorrow isn't going to be the fundamental review that we know the sector needs. But our job is to hear the sector and to ensure the sector is heard in government. We met with the Early Years Minister not that long ago. We'll meet with Maria Caulfield in the coming weeks. So our job is to get the sector heard in government, but also to scrutinise what government does. And that will be our next job, I guess, to scrutinise what comes out of the budget tomorrow. And obviously we will tweet as we do to make sure that we're doing our best to communicate. And this session will be, as we said, available up on the YouTube channel afterwards. And we'll tweet out a link to that when it's there. So thanks very much to Connect for organising. Thanks again to our speakers. Fingers crossed for tomorrow. God bless everybody and good luck out there in early years land. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.